Good evening and welcome to this session of American Muslims for Palestine's 13th Annual Convention. I hope you all have enjoyed all the previous sessions and have come out with a sense of hope for the future of the work that we still have to do for the liberation of Palestine, but also with more determination. My name is Felicia Eaves, and I'm very honored to be your host for what I believe will be a very interesting and exciting discussion. Tonight, we will be talking about the struggle for liberation in the Black and Palestinian communities in the United States and Israel-Palestine. And although Black and Palestinian struggle has been on parallel tracks, there have been Black Palestinian Americans and Arab American activists who have been in the struggle together for many years and recognize that although there are differences in how we may go about our work, the one thing that is crystal clear is that Black and Palestinian people have endured and continue to endure the same types of systemic and institutional racism and oppression in the United States and in Israel-Palestine. So tonight we have 4 esteemed guests who will discuss their experiences working with and on behalf of Black and Palestinian communities. And they will not only provide some historical context in terms of how these communities have worked together historically, but they will also give us some insight on what the future for the work of Black and Palestinian solidarity work will be on the ground, and especially now that we are entering a new White House administration here in the United States. So I'd like to introduce our guests, and then they will each provide some opening remarks, and then we'll go into a Q&A session. So our first guest is Sandra Tamari. Tamari is a Palestine organizer and executive director of Adalah Justice Project. And as she is based in St. Louis, Missouri, the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson in August 2014 greatly impacted her work. And since then, she has focused on building joint liberation efforts between Palestinian and Black communities. She was a lead organizer of the Palestinian contingent of Ferguson October in 2014. Next we will have Bill Fletcher Jr. He is the executive editor of globalafricanworker.com and the past president of Trans-Africa Forum and a longtime union activist. He has been engaged in work around Palestine since his teens. Next, we will have Aisha Al-Adiwa. Aisha Al-Adiwa is the founder and president of Women in Islam Incorporated, which is an organization of Muslim women that focuses on human rights and social justice. Ms. Al-Adiwa is a consultant to numerous interfaith organizations and documentary projects on the Muslim American experience. And last but not least, we have Dr. Hatem Bazian, who is the co-founder and professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College. And he's also founded the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at the Center for Race and Gender at UC Berkeley, which is a research unit dedicated to the systematic study of othering Islam and Muslims. And he is also the co-chair of AMP. So welcome to all of you. And Sandra, why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much, Felicia, and thank you to all the organizers at AMP for putting on this really amazing conference. It's been a very challenging year for everyone, and I hope everyone is doing as well as possible in these times. And just an honor to be here in conversation with people who have been doing the work. As Felicia mentioned, I'm based in St. Louis, and you know, the assassination, the killing of Mike Brown continues to impact my organizing and the way that I view Palestine work. And the rebellions, the Black-led rebellions of the summer also are, you know, just another indication of how our movement for Palestine is wrapped up in making sure that we transform American politics, we transform the racial discrimination that happens in this country. And, you know, I'm just really excited about abolition as a framework, abolition meaning the destruction, the ending of all carceral systems, and how that gets us closer to thinking about ending U.S. imperialism, including U.S. support of Israel's settler colonialism in Palestine. So to all this to say that, I do not see these things as being separate. I see them as being intertwined, interlocked in a very meaningful way, and that our work here in the US has to be focused on transforming this country if we want to see a free Palestine. And I'll leave it at that, and I know we'll dig in deeper.
And Bill, why don't you give us some insight, some words?
Thank you, Felicia, and greetings. Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor to be with everyone this evening. And in preparation for this program tonight, I found myself thinking about 2 points that I wanted to raise. The first is about settler colonies and religion. There is an interesting flaw in the Zionist critique of those of us who support Palestinian freedom, when they basically suggest that there's something that is very unique about Israel, and that there is something nefarious and objectively anti-Jewish in our critique of the Israeli experiment. And what struck me is that once we grasp that Israel is a settler colonial project, you then, if you look through history, you come and understand that every settler colonial project from Europe has connected itself to both race and religion, arguing in every case that they are on a mission from God. And Israel happens to be only the last in a series. So if you look at the English colonization of Ireland in the 1500s, if you look at the colonization of Southern Africa, what became the United States, Canada, Australia, so on, you see in each of these settler colonial projects this very bizarre notion that the settler colonial project is connected to God, and that God allegedly had some sort of communication with the settlers. Now, somehow the natives are always ignored in these communications, but God allegedly had a communication with the settlers, giving the settlers the right to take the land of the people. And this is very important that we understand this, and we talk with people about this pseudo-religious argument that plays itself out in every settler colonial experiment. The second point is that African Americans, US African Americans, have been among the principal victims of this racial settler colonial project, which came to be known as the United States. And this means that at some level, there is a latent sympathy within large sections of Black America for the Palestinians. What clouds this has been a particular interpretation of Christianity within Black America. And it has been in part related to the identification with the Hebrew/Israelite plight against Pharaoh. So that to the extent that people look at that as history or as an inspiration, it has clouded the view of the actual situation that was connected to the creation of the settler colony that ultimately is known as Israel. And so part of our work really does go to recognizing, one, that there's latent sympathy, usually unorganized, but latent sympathy for Palestinians. But second, that we have to take on the theological and historical arguments that have been used to cloud the entire discussion. And I'll reserve my other comments for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And Sister, please help me pronounce your name.
Aisha Al-Adiwa. Adawiya.
Al-Adawiya. Thank you. Thank you. please give your remarks.
Well, yes. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation. It happens to be something very dear to my heart. And I'll just try to relate very briefly my coming to this position of feeling compelled to stand with the Palestinian people and the struggle for freedom and liberation. Growing up in the South, very segregated South, that experience, I think, primed me for what I live even today, as an African American Muslim woman struggling still for our freedom and liberation in this part of the world. But that experience, and then coming into maturity on the heels of the anti-apartheid movement for South Africa, was a natural calling for me as well. I saw the connectedness, a word that we use now is the intersectionality. But I knew early on that was a movement that I belonged in. And so it was a natural fit for me. So I joined early on to be with the South African people in throwing off the shackles of apartheid at that time. Although they have still not realized the full liberation, that movement was really very instrumental in bringing us to the Palestinian liberation struggle. And that too was a natural alignment for me because, again, I see the connectedness. And so these are all very organic kind of connections in throwing off the shackles of apartheid. And I certainly agree with the assessment that our brother made that in the United States, first and foremost, I'm feeling compelled more so than ever to say that we are living on occupied land, and that we really need to ask permission even to speak on this land, and to acknowledge strongly, powerfully, that we are, in many instances, settlers. We are here voluntarily and involuntarily, but we are on stolen land, and we need to acknowledge that in every gathering that we have, certainly in this part of the world. So I tend to want to bring that up every time I have an opportunity. And so I see again the willingness to look the other way, in this case of the settler colonial experience in Israel. That it's not hard to understand how we in the United States, many of us, can sympathize with the oppression perpetrated against the Palestinian people by the Israeli government, because the United States itself is a settler state. So I think that the more we understand about this reality that we live, it brings us to a place where we are better able to position ourselves to stand in principle against the apartheid experience in Israel, and to be true to those leanings, because it's impossible to support one without the other. So I look forward to the engagement and the conversations and questions and comments from the people who are joining us online. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and Dr. Bazian has joined us. So would you like to give us some opening remarks?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. And thanks for going ahead of me. I just had another session, and I just came in to the last part of Sister Aisha's framing. in terms of the really the solidarity, not only between Palestinians and the Black movement, but to think about solidarity of the global South in relations to struggle in the global North. One has to ground oneself that we are dealing with a period of over 500 years that the world that we are experiencing in today. We're dealing with a settler colonialism, both in Palestine and in the Americas, Australia, New Zealand. And once we understand the meaning of settler colonialism that was built on a particular understanding of the human and the world, included in it a massive reorientation of the globe, trade and movement around raw material and sources, the enslavement of Black Africans, and the numbers, again, whether you're talking about 15 million to 30 million or 70 million, we still would never know the exact number of the those who've been taken and enslaved. That was built on the genocide of the native population. So modernity and the settler colonialism in the modern world was built on multiple genocides that we're still the recipient of this genocide. People don't again talk about the genocide of the Belgium and King Leopold in Southern Africa. 15 million were perished in that colonial project. But also the part of this experience is the erasure of epistemologies of the different communities in the global South, including Palestinians, where we are experiencing erasure. But think about all the erasure of the epistemologies of Black Africans, both in Africa as a result of colonization, as well as all those who are enslaved and having to go through a complete erasure to the specificity of their own name. And that's, again, for those who study the history of Nation of Islam, the Malcolm X, and others, it's the unknown, because really there was a whole structure of erasure. And lastly, I would also link in thinking about also the centrality of Christianity, imperial Christianity, because there's progressive Christianity and there's imperial Christianity, where manifest destiny, bringing in civilization as a result of bringing the gospel to these colonized population, is also went hand in hand with this process, which is, again, is something that Palestinians are experiencing, manifest destiny relative to Zionism and framing religion around settler colonialism. So these are some issues for us to think about as we speak about the multiple ways of solidarity.
Certainly opened up a conversation that we need to have in terms of, how do Black and Palestinian people come together? We've been working together, but I think we need to understand these historical contexts. And it's interesting because I've been reading Professor Alex Lubin's book, Geographies of Liberation, the Making of an Afro-Arab Political Imaginary. And there was a passage in his book in the introduction that really struck me. And he says that Palestinians who live contrapunctual identities are produced in the collusion of the exiles' competing national attachments between home and homelessness. And as Edward Said recognized, that the contradiction of the exiles' belongings produce a different sort of consciousness. A second sight. Contrapunctualism names the consciousness of being between national inclusion and exile. And I thought this really struck me, because as an African American, and I've had this conversation with my father a lot, in terms of, this is our home. We don't have another home. So when people, the chants that have been throughout the civil rights movement, and even now telling Black people, especially Black Americans, African Americans, to go back to Africa. Yes, that is our ancestral home, but this is our home. The United States is our home. And so, and also linking that to what has happened to the Palestinians since 1948. They're at home, but they are homeless. And so I just kind of wanted to, you know, if anyone had any, you all are talking about colonial settlerism, how do we connect that sense of homelessness between Black and Palestinian people? Anyone want to take a stab?
I can try, Felicia. I think, you know, you're hitting on something that's really deep and important. And Palestinians struggle in this country with their identity. I mean, we at the Adalah Justice Project have really been pushing, of course, this idea that, you know, there's no hierarchy of who's more Palestinian than anyone else. Just because we happen to live in exile, we live in the diaspora, doesn't mean we don't have as much of a stake in the politics, the society that we hope to build. There's a lot of deferral, obviously, especially after Oslo, to, you know, that there's only certain Palestinians that can speak for us in the arena of politics or the future of what Palestine will be. And I think this is really a dangerous place. I know that there have been lots of conversations about the role of the diaspora in this conference. And, you know, I think that the general sentiment, at least the ones that the conversations I've heard, is that we have to see ourselves as an inseparable and integral part of the homeland. And so there is this contradiction, right? We also want to engage here in this country as full citizens of this country. And so we're caught between this, you know, this belonging to both places. And obviously it's a very different kind of, you know, dilemma for, you know, Black Americans who are brought here involuntarily, as Sister Aisha pointed out, to the stolen land. You know, what is the role, right? Because, you know, America is a place of contradictions. It is a place where citizenship is defined as equal. But of course, we know what it's built for. We know what the settlers that came to this country, what they were building this place, who belonged and who didn't belong. And that is the continuation. We have a continuation of those systems. Every, you know, state mechanism in this country is defined to include, you know, Christian, white, cisgender men as the top of the heap, and the rest of us have to fight for the scraps. So I know that, you know, there's a lot more to what you're posing, but I think that, you know, the radical politics of Black and Palestinian solidarity has always come from the left and people who critique those structures. We're not seeing this kind of solidarity coming from liberals. So we have to constantly be reminding ourselves, like, who are our allies? And the allies are radical internationalists who understand these systems.
Can I add something, Felicia? Okay, I'm hearing feedback. I think that one of the challenges that we have to put on the table is that Arabs and Palestinians specifically came here voluntarily. And one of the challenges for migrant populations is once they arrive in a new place, what is their relationship to the social relations of that new location? The Irish, for example, were, I would argue, racially oppressed by the English. And there was a great Irish diaspora. Irish went to different parts of the world and in many cases actively joined in oppressive systems, including but not limited to in the United States. Part of the contradictions that we have to put on the table in terms of building solidarity is that Arabs generally and Palestinians in particular, since we're talking about it here, came here, Palestinians thrown out of their homes, their homeland, and come to the United States, where they have to make a decision. Every migrant to the United States has to make a decision, and that decision is, how do you relate to African Americans and Native Americans? And to the extent that that decision is not made consciously, it implicitly is made in favor of supporting or at least tolerating the larger system. This is why, in terms of building solidarity, we have to engage in a lot of mutual education, and really talk very concretely about the way that race has been constructed, both in the Arab world and as well as in the United States, and where people of Arab descent find themselves in a racial hierarchy that the Euro-American system established. This is not just true limited to our relationship as African Americans to a people of Arab descent. It's true generally that it's one of the issues that a lot of people don't want to deal with because it's very sensitive. But once you arrive on these shores, there is a hierarchy that you're put into unless you actively resist it. And that's part of the job of building a new solidarity, which is actively resisting that.
May I comment?
Yes, you may.
Yes, no doubt. There is the kind of dismantling of that, what I like to refer to as volunteer slavery, how we allow ourselves to be co-opted into oppressive systems, whereby we become complicit. And I think I like this word complicity now these days because it helps me describe a lot of positions that we find ourselves in. And again, those are difficult questions to raise and to begin to delve in and answer. But that's precisely where we need to go. We need to go deep and ask the very hard questions and come out with serious, honest solutions and answers to these questions. I'd also like to push back on some of the language that is given to us and that we tend to imbibe and regurgitate at will. So, you know, we are constantly asking this question, what is an Arab? Yeah. And when we talk about Arabs, we don't imagine a black face. And so I think that that's part of the unpacking that we as people, conscious people who are struggling, you know, to fight oppression and gain our liberation on all fronts, wherever we are, that these are some of the things that we have to look at. And that means black people within the Arabic speaking communities and otherwise. But since we are talking about Palestine, we'll stay here for now. And so again, we have to be willing to bring forth those faces, those images, those stories, not in a subjugated way, but as equal partners, you know, in this struggle. So I think that it's part of also what we're calling home. But I think it all rests with us to begin where we are and to acknowledge that we are occupiers ourselves by not speaking at least about the issues of genocide where we are now. And since I'm sitting in the United States, I'm constantly referring to the atrocities perpetrated against the Native Americans. And of course, we can reference the enslavement of African people here in this part of the world. So again, it's all part of the same ball of wax. I don't use the word allies anymore. I look for the word solidarity, because for me, ally means someone on the outside looking in. And when you become in solidarity with someone, it means you become a part of that struggle. So I want us to begin to look at some of the language that we use and see how we can push back, create our own language or definitions of language that we use so that we can create more clarity about what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
I may comment on, I think the issue of race if we don't take stock of how race is structured and infused in everything, it's in the air we breathe. We are living, all of us, in a Eurocentric, highly racialized, stratified society. If you go to the Arab world, if you go to even some parts of Asia, some parts of Africa, Latin America, if you look at the advertisement on the boards, on the billboards, it's always reflecting a white face. Or even the darker complexion faces, they actually airbrush whiteness into it. Unless we take stock of race and how race informs, regulates, shapes everything that we do, then we fail to recognize how race also gets to be constructed around our identity of belonging. So immigrants who come in here, they're coming to, quote, integrate, assimilate into whiteness. They don't want to, quote, integrate and assimilate into blackness. So you don't see the solidarities. I'm very critical, for example, that in our contemporary discourse as Muslims in America, we try to engage in interfaith dialogue. It is not an interfaith dialogue, it's interfaith with whiteness, because often those relationships are either constructed with Christian churches that are white, that are assumption that they have some power, or also we have interfaith dialogue with segments of the Jewish community that is often seen as to also be places of power and influence. And here, Jewish/Zionists in terms of what we call normalization. All this is a discourse of actually trying to act out the racial epistemic that is internalized. So we see ourselves by hating our own skin and trying to relate to those who really don't want to be or don't see us as a human. So we internalize our subhumanness, and as such, we try to distance ourselves from those who remind us who we are. So we don't see solidarity with the Black community or Latino community, or even among our own selves. We don't want to have solidarity because it reminds us of our internalized, epistemologically structured inferiority. And I think this has to be touching on the deep. When we speak about solidarity, it's not an act that you do. It is actually a mental frame that you have to deprogram yourself in terms of superiority, inferiority, who is important and who is not, for us to reach both an internal solidarity as well as external solidarity. Without local transnational understanding, then we'll be falling at the same type of deficiencies that we almost on a regular basis tend to replicate.
Thank you. This is a good segue into the aspects of the religious aspects of how do we bring the Black communities and the Palestinian communities together. I know in the organizing, for example, going to the Congressional Black Caucus, it's been very difficult trying to get some of the older members of Congress, especially, to get on board with challenging AIPAC, for example. And one of those issues, the reasons for that is because of the connection that African Americans especially have with the Holy Land. So I want to expound on that discussion on how do we transcend that, or can we transcend that? Is it possible to sort of compartmentalize religiosity from what we need to do in terms of bringing the Black community and the Palestinian community or the Arab American community together without having religion be a big part of it? Bill, did you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you read my mind. So I think this has to be divided into two. So on the one hand, there are those that have a kind of theological / ideological orientation within the Congressional Black Caucus and elsewhere that truly believe that support for Israel is consistent with their theological beliefs. And that's a particular struggle. And connected to that is the willingness to invisibilize Palestinians, which you see consistently. But that's very true about the oppressed as a whole, that we are regularly rendered invisible. But even the oppressed can perpetrate oppression. So I think that that's one issue that we have to look at. But separate and apart from that, there is a practical and political fear that by taking a stand in favor of Palestinian rights, that one will receive the wrath, not only of the Zionists, but the Christian Zionists, and of other right-wing forces. And therefore, the demand upon, let's say, just the Congressional Black Caucus to take a different stand cannot simply be one of asking them to do the right thing. It needs to be both distinguishing what's the sense of their objection or the source of their objection. And then the second thing is that there has to be an organized force that is basically saying, we represent a constituency that is in fact demanding that you do something differently. And that goes way beyond individual letters, emails, and phone calls, because keep in mind that the other side is highly organized. And that's what I think we have to face. And many of us that have dealt with the Congressional Black Caucus tell very similar stories, that sometimes you're able to have a one-on-one off the record where you get the sense that someone really understands you. At other points, there is this incredible resistance and fear that to take a stand will bring with it the wrath of the right wing.
Anyone else want to take a stab at that?
Yes, I'd like to jump in there for a second. No doubt, the fears are real. You know, there is a cost for standing in integrity, you see. So they are right, you know. But what is it that they bring to the table? Someone said to me that the two-party system that we have now is like a man who has two legs, has one right foot and one left foot, and they both belong to the same body. So I think that's a pretty profound statement to make, because we've had the opportunity to witness some of that firsthand. And I think on one level, we need to be appreciative of the clarity that's been presented to us as a result of this previous administration, notwithstanding the struggles that we continue to face moving forward. But I think that the political system is the political system, you know, and I think that we'd be very naive to expect more from these entities, such as these caucuses, to do more than they already do. We hope that they would stand up, you know, for what's right. And even if we tout the United Nations and those resolutions that we say, you know, are good things, that at least to uphold those resolutions that speak to the issue of justice, right? That if we cannot even do that, then we need to really reconsider what is it that we are looking to bring relief to the oppression that's really impacting all of us on the planet. So I'm not one who invests a lot of hope and energy into the political process, because it's designed to perpetuate itself. And it only changes if the people are willing to make change. And that does not always come, you know, in closed door sessions, you know, or calling your senator or, you know, something of the sort. So yeah, it's radical determination to be free, you know. And the BDS movement, for instance, is a non-violent movement, for God's sake. You know, What more could you ask for? You're asking people who are being brutalized every day, taken from their homes. One Palestinian gave me a key, a replica of the houses that were taken from them. And all they have is a key to wear that say someday they will be able to return to their homes. Well, my God, in the South, Black people had farms and, they were just taken away just at will. So no, we have to go deeper and be determined to hold ourselves and everyone else that we vote into some positions of perceived power to respond and deliver.
If I may just go a little bit on this topic, which is very, very critical for us to really contextualize what is taking place. And maybe I could just bring in also Sister Aisha's stepping out of the peace form on the transnational dimension shows that, you have to be principled and at all turns and understand where are your grounding. So Sister Aisha Al-Adiwa was part of the peace forum, and their steps relative to normalization and the statements that were issued was very critical. But take it back to locally. It is such a difficult to try to ascertain a political movement in the United States where all the power chips are stacked against you. So we're speaking about Palestinian Black solidarity. We're not speaking in a vacuum. You witnessed the murder of George Floyd of 8 minutes 46 seconds on TV, and now for the past 6 months, the debate is blaming Black Lives Matter and demonizing them at a moment where everyone actually can see, and you could actually just track so many Black, young and old, completely unarmed, that are being killed on a daily basis, which reminds me again of the Palestinians being killed on a daily basis. So we have to assess the arrangement of forces. If you speak about AIPAC is a disciplined, well-funded, systematic organization. It works within the Black community to recruit young Black leaders and shepherd them across. In the same way that I would look in the Muslim world today, Israel is working through normalization with the Arab world to take young individuals to shepherd them through across the process. We need to build a movement that actually can take every part of dimension. And maybe I could be very critical sometimes that we have been caught in thinking of the movement because we saw some Hollywood movie about the movement and not really thinking about the struggle, the sacrifices, the pain that has went around to try to get a movement, whether you're speaking about this civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid movement, Central American Solidarity movement, or Earth First that got us to think differently of the environmental movement. Hollywood tends to shape it as he came, he went up, people embrace him, and that's the end of the story, rather than thinking about the different mobilization, the legal strategy, the protest strategy, the boycott strategy, the electoral strategy. So we get caught in thinking that it's just only one thing. If just we get what you call a new MLK or new Malcolm X, well, I need to remind you, both of them were assassinated. So we need to understand that you have to have a movement that can actually live and continue to struggle, even though that its top leadership can be and will be targeted. Because again, I studied the COINTELPRO. One can say that COINTELPRO succeeded because it eliminated every African-American leader of the 1960s. Either they were killed, they were sent to jail, or went to exile. And then on the back of this, you get a whole distortion that occurs. So I think what we need is really to hunker down and understand what are the dynamics. And I think it's very what you call limited to say that Black Caucus does not support Palestine. I don't think it's as simple as that, because you have to think, if you're running for an office, you need $2 million in your bank account to run. Otherwise, AIPAC the banking industry, the insurance industry, the medical industry, the tobacco industry, the alcohol industry, all are supporting your opposition because they make money, right? And I don't even leave the prison industrial complex, the athletic or the sport industrial complex, all are investing. And now you're telling the person to stand and say, I support Palestine, and then your opposition having $2 to $5 million open check to try to actually rise up and be there. So I think what we need is a little bit more understanding of the political dynamics, both national and transnational, that we are in.
Thank you, Dr. Bazian. That's a really good segue into looking at what's going on the ground. Sandra, I know that you are on the ground and have been on the ground, and I was with you in 2014 when we did Ferguson October. And since 2014, we've seen this progression of young Black men and women being killed. But how are you looking at this in terms of melding the Palestinian liberation movement with the movement for Black lives?
Yeah, thank you, Felicia. I mean, it was an intense time back in 2014, and we reached out to our allies in the Black movement here in St. Louis and asked a simple question: do you want Palestinians to be here? And they said yes. And so we took our lead, right, from the radical leadership here in St. Louis. People like Jamala Rogers, who I know Bill knows well, from the Organization for Black Struggle, Montega Simmons, folks at Hands Up United, Tef Poe and Tara T, who ended up going on the first Dream Defenders delegation to Palestine. All of this to say is that we were following the lead of Black leadership that we already had relationship with. These are the organizations that delivered the first BDS win in St. Louis, a cultural boycott. We were working together to get the city to be rid of Veolia, a Veolia contract, when the Veolia was on the BDS list. And so, these kinds of relationships in joint struggle were the basis of what we had going into 2014. And it was a shared vision, right, of what we needed to be working toward, which was not only ending state violence, but ending, corporate influence, right, in our city politics. And it was a radical, notion. These were our Black leadership had already an internationalist framing for their work that they inherited from their elders, going back to the 60s and 70s. So we know that we stand on the shoulders of a lot of organizing. So 2014 was a flashpoint, and Ferguson was a flashpoint, but we were building on decades of understanding. And it was just a reawakening for many Palestinians in St. Louis about that history. But the Black folks in St. Louis, remembered it. It was, Palestinian flags were showing up in Ferguson long before Palestinians were showing up in Ferguson. Let's put it that way. Black folks were bringing those flags to Ferguson. I think that's a story that's not told often. Palestinians were slow. We were there the first week, some of us, very few of us. It was a lot of solidarity organizers that came with a few Palestinians to Ferguson, and we dragged Palestinians to the Ferguson movement. Felicia, you'll remember Ferguson October, that there were more Palestinians from Chicago that came from our local communities. And so this is, but I do want to say, 6 years has changed things a lot. And I will say, with the most recent uprisings, I was really moved that I saw like a real shift in the way that Palestinians were talking about, the Black struggle. Especially the young people, people that were, very young during Ferguson, coming of age now, teenagers in their early 20s, that, they were tripping over each other to be part of the movement, to be in the streets. And that was really moving. And I think that we can say that we've re-sparked, right, that radical solidarity. Today, I think what we are doing is really, we want to support, the demands, full demands of Black liberation. When they say defund the police, we don't say, but the police are helpful. The police provide, some security at the mosque when we show up for prayers. No, we say absolutely. We understand that the police are an integral part of the discrimination that Black Americans face. We don't try to water down the demand. We don't accept, as Palestinians, we don't accept that when liberal Zionists say that BDS is too radical. We have to understand that, defund the police is the first step, and we have to support that demand in its entirety. And so how do we do that? What I would just say about the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, they don't support Palestinian rights, and they don't really support Black rights in many instances. So the Movement for Black Lives is putting forward a really ambitious, piece of legislation now called the Breathe Act that's going to put into, practice defunding the police. I don't think many members of the Congressional Black Caucus have signed on to that. It's the squad that's pushing that forward. It's Rashida Tlaib that's one of the original co-sponsors of that. So we have to be looking right to these really radical voices in Congress, and understand that identity doesn't always follow politics. So we have to be looking to the policies, the programs of these individuals. And so that's how I see it. We have to be supporting the full demands.
Does anyone else want to comment on the connection between the Movement for Black Lives and the Palestinian Liberation Movement?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but it is no question, and I talk again about the distinction between allyship and solidarity. It means the cause, it's your cause. Yeah. So there's no question about it. It's just, it's part of the movement for liberation. And, I think Dr. King said it very well, oppression of anyone is oppression of everyone everywhere, however it goes. And that is so true. And especially now in this climate, we can see it. So they're all connected. And this is the work, again, that we need to do deeply at the grassroots level, at the community level, so that we understand that these are our issues and there's no separation. And quite frankly, we don't have to ask permission to stand up for what's right. You just show up for what's the right thing to do and be there. And by showing up, people who are actually the first targets in the line of defense, right? They see you, right? And so you don't have to apologize or ask permission to join whatever it is. You just show up and be there. And as things occur where your help is needed, you show up and provide whatever it is that you're able to provide. But I think we need to get rid of these distinctions between our movements and see that we're one human family, and that's how we need to look at ourselves and our movements to get free, for all of us.
Yeah.
Felicia, if I could just add, in the United States, I think that many of us have a great deal of difficulty practicing solidarity. And part of that is because even the oppressed live in the center of an empire, and we could develop imperial consciousness. So we feel that we don't need to learn other languages. We don't need to study the history of the world, because it doesn't matter, because we live right here and we got the guns. And boom, right? And so then there's also, someone mentioned earlier, this sort of danger of transactional solidarity. And this idea that we can only support other people if they're going to support us, as opposed to deciding and recognizing that there's certain struggles you just simply have to join regardless. But all of this necessitates organization. This doesn't come out of the air. It doesn't come out of us preaching. It has to be built over time, and people have to learn an international and internationalist practice. That's why I get sometimes sick and tired of hearing people say, well, why should I be concerned about the Western Sahara? What's that have to do with me? You know, or why should I be concerned about Palestine? Or why should I be concerned about East Timor or whatever else? And because we live here, it's very easy for people to just shut their eyes, close off their ears, and pretend like the rest of the world doesn't exist. And for many people, it won't, which is why we've got to build organizations that help to actually demonstrate what an internationalist practices. And so for the Black Lives Matter movement, it's got to be more than resolutions, solidarity statements. And I'm not being critical of them. I'm just talking about the way our movements often function. We think that solidarity is signing a solidarity statement, passing a resolution at a convention, and then that's it. As opposed to understanding that if you're going to be practicing solidarity, it means struggling against oppression and against an oppressor.
Dr. Bazian?
I think, again, we have to have a different perspective. For me, again, coming from an Islamic background and Islamic understanding, is that what does the mean of commanding to justice means in actual terms? It doesn't say just us, it's justice, right? And for me, all of our tradition is based on speaking to even against your own family, your own father and mother, against your own self, right? So in a period where we are in we're in the center of empire, we tend to exceptionalize, as my brother Fletcher has said, exceptionalize our positionality in here because we benefit from where we are. So how really to develop real solidarity, to speak of Black-Palestinian solidarity, but also solidarity across the globe. If you're walking the streets, you're looking at all the securitization infrastructure that is there. That's been first perfected on the Black community before it's been translated into international structure, before being brought back in here. We speak about Abu Ghraib and the torture structure. Well, if you ask our Black brothers and sisters in the prison industrial complex in here, that was perfected on them. If you speak about weapons of mass destruction, our Native American brothers and sisters, they've been the most bombed in relations to experiments on them, experiments of in Nevada and different parts of this country in relations to the development of these weapons of mass destruction. So what we need is to have really a deeper commitment to justice wherever it is, and not just us because we benefit from it. And I do take on, we do need to challenge racism wherever it rears its ugly head. I do know that there are racism in the Arab world, and that exists because we are all trained. Our mind has been framed around Eurocentricity, which means that there is a hierarchy that is there, and we are a colonized population that is living in the post-colonial structure, which means that our education, our sociology, our anthropology, our arts, all are reflective of the colonial structure that we continue to live in it, aspiring. Again, I also say we aspire upon the white fence upon the hill, and we don't want to go down to the valley where the darker complexion people are living and existing. So that dynamics has to be really challenged in order for us to say, when we say solidarity, what does it mean? And how does it translate at the local level, at the national level, at the transnational level in effective ways? So that for me is what commitment to justice means, and not only, again, as passing a resolution, important as it is, but that's just the first step in doing so. PDS, that's also a first step. Taking delegations, that's the step. Delegations both to what you call, I always say that there is a West Bank and there is a Gaza in every neighborhood. You just go to some of the inner cities in here. You don't need. In Berkeley, we have close to 3,000 homeless living in tents. I drive around. This is, for me, is a different type of Gaza or the West Bank and the refugee camps. And if you go to New York, Philadelphia, Boston, you are seeing homelessness in mass. These are structural refugees of the center of empire, because the empire decided to spend $7 trillion on death machines across the world, and therefore the consequences, the bombs that we throw overseas are blowing in our inner cities with the homeless, drug addictions, and so on that is taking place. So solidarity and justice has to look at the bigger picture while you hold on what you are able to make change in your effective immediate circumstances. Doesn't mean that you become what you call so caught in the analysis that you lead yourself to paralysis in everything that you do. So that has to be part of the conversation in terms of where we're heading on Black-Palestinian, Black-Palestinian Latin American solidarity, Black-Palestinian African solidarity, Black-Palestinian and Asian solidarity, because this is the type of commitment that we have, especially if we want to bring a different world in the center of empire.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bazian. That is a really good place to kind of wrap things up. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. This was a very inspirational
Part two.
Inspiring.
Looking forward to
Oh,
part
yes,
two.
yes.
Inshallah.
Absolutely.
I want to thank, really, I want to thank Sister Aisha for all her principled work, her standing. It was just like,
No. I'm honored to be in the company of all you people who
it's
are
an
on the
honor. It's a
ground.
pleasure.
Really, thank you
Our
so much.
elder, we need to express our gratitude because you're showing the way throughout all your work and your history. So really thank you for all what you do.
So
Thank
while
you.
we just have just a minute or so left, kind of go around each one of you if you have any closing remarks, and then we're going to wrap this up. So I'll start with you, Bill.
Well, Felicia, I'll say what I've been saying for a long time. We need a African American Council on Palestine. We need it now. We've needed it for years. It needs to be a united front. It can't just be of the people of the left who like each other. It's got to be very broad and prepared to, make things uncomfortable for a few people.
Thank you.
I'll leave it
Sandra?
at that.
Well, I'll just say that, today being the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, I want to thank all the non-Palestinians who are out there, and especially my co-panelists who are working as hard as any Palestinian I know for the liberation of Palestine and for oppressed peoples around the globe. That's what gives me hope.
You're
in
welcome.
This world.
Thank you.
So thank
Sister Aisha.
Wow. Well, I think I've said everything. We have to decolonize our own minds and get ready, for the deep, difficult conversation. I love kumbaya because, that sustains us. But we have to prepare ourselves also to have the difficult conversations because that's where the gold is. So I'm looking forward to those hard conversations, and they're beginning to percolate. So looking forward to more. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And Dr. Bazian.
Thank you for bringing all of us together. Thanks for all my co-panelists. Just to remind people, the fact that we defeated the fascists in the White House and we have a Biden administration doesn't mean we go back and begin a watcher for the social, political, economic, religious discourses. So time of work right now, and we need to push harder today than yesterday during Trump. So I want for everyone to recharge your batteries again, get yourself committed, and the time of hard work right now. So don't be comfortable, because I know that when Obama got elected, everybody felt comfortable that that's it, the revolution is televised, and we sat there and we got busy in terms of being watching what is taking place. The time of watching is over. Time is doing and acting and actually taking the pressure, and don't take no for an answer. Silence doesn't change history. It's speaking people that transform and inspire. So the time for us to do the work is today and tomorrow.
Well, thank you all so very much. I'm just honored to have been your host, and I know that there will be a lot of good takeaways from this, and perhaps we can have a second part 2 to this discussion. So thank you all to all the people who were listening and watching tonight. And yes, we just really need to be out there and not fall asleep like we did during the Obama years. Stay the course, stay in the streets if we have to, and let's do this. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.